said, we'll get into it here. Joey, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ray. Thanks for the the introduction. Yeah, it's cool. We have the Clark's connection, right? So you were at Clark's for how many years?
Yeah, I was there about 4 years.
4 years.
So from 2016 to the pandemic.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was my first job out of design school back in. So I was there 2006 to 2000 and oh well, almost no, part of 2007. So I was there for a year and a half.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
felt
short
longer,
tenure.
but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was an interesting place to kind of start my design career. Like for me, it wasn't my first job, but it kind of felt like maybe like my first real job actually like designing products and bringing them to market. And I feel like footwear is kind of a good place for people to start their career in general because you are a little bit more removed from the technical side. The demand on like a person in that design team is so high to like really churn out
Yeah.
different SKUs and upper designs and bottoms. So you really kind of get this crash course in like sketching and proportion and kind of all those like really core skill sets.
Yeah, exactly. No, I really appreciated the footwear industry as, kind of being my first job for that reason. It's I didn't, need to do intense CAD work for it. A lot of to be honest, like throughout my career, I was always allergic to CAD. So
Yeah.
I always found a way around it or just like collaborated with someone who was really good at it. Um,
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I've kind of found myself in a similar boat within the last 3 years. Actually, like you and I sort of met early on in the pandemic because I was in the process of making that transition. I don't know if you remember this call, but I was in the process of making this transition from like footwear back in industrial design, and there weren't that many people that I had kind of known who had made that jump.
yeah,
But it was kind of yourself, and then Datula was sort of the other person who was
right.
aware of.
That's right. Yeah, no, I remember that call very clearly. And you ended up getting a role at Newell, right?
Yeah, yeah. It worked out, and yeah, now it's kind of progressed, and I feel like I'm definitely in a position now that I feel much more comfortable in. I think for me, footwear was almost kind of a strange fit in a lot of ways. That it certainly has its own culture to it. It's very like fashion driven and
Yeah.
very focused on like aesthetics and styles. And I think industrial design tends to you get a little bit more of that ability to wear a lot of different hats, and you get to learn a lot more. But yeah, I was curious, like, what was that transition like for you, like to kind of go from because you worked at I think Banana Republic as well, or there were a
Yeah.
couple other footwear roles
Well,
in there.
yeah, so I did that work for Banana Republic while I was at Clark. So Banana with all within that year and a half, it was crazy. Banana Republic came to Clark's with needing their help with making their shoes more comfortable. Surprise, surprise. And
Yeah,
and so yeah, they threw me on that project to be the designer. So um, what I did was work with the shoe engineers to re-engineer the comfort, like the fit. I mean, I was basically like like I was the model. I would try on the shoes and feel them out, and then they would make adjustments. And I think I fit like their the standard size, like the size 9 medium or something.
yeah, size nine. Yeah, me too.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So it was like perfect to be like the model size. And then, although in parallel, I was designing like the outside, right? So the aesthetics, the style, and trying to follow their brand guidelines. And that was, yeah, it was a really cool project because it was like, you know, putting in a new engine and designing around, this new engine. So it was utilizing the Clark's heritage and story with while maintaining the Banana Republic look and feel. Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I was curious to ask you because you kind of had this start in like corporate world and then you transitioned into consulting for a bit and then you're back in corporate and now you're kind of in this interesting new chapter where you've like started your own studio. Um I was curious like what was that sort of how was that roller coaster and what were some of the like pros and cons of each and what kind of like led you into where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started out in I did my year and a half in-house as a shoe designer, and then I went headfirst into consulting at 4 years at Continuum, and then 4 years at Smart Design. And it was such a different, like a contrast, right? It was a lot for me to learn in that time, and I really enjoyed that time, in consulting. In a way, it felt like an extension of design school, where it was like working late nights and hustling more, as opposed to working in house, where it was 9 to 5, and if you work past 5, people would be like,
Right.
"Wow, you're really burning the midnight oil," you know, and
Yeah.
you know, uh, because people in-house, like at companies, had lives outside of work, right? Whereas designers, it was like, man, I don't know, I could get away with that in my 20s, working, um, crazy hours without realizing, geez, looking back, it's like, man, it was like being exploited, even though it was really self-imposed, to be honest. But there was a certain kind of level of demand, you know, to kind of meet uh, kind of a certain caliber, right, of output and design. So, and there was always that, healthy competition in design teams, all that stuff. So, if I could have done it a little differently, I would have, you know, had a healthier approach, tried to at least. But it was a different time too. I think now, thankfully, with like Gen Z pushing for a healthier like work-life balance, I think things are finding a better equilibrium. In any case, I think I learned along the way to balance things out.
Yeah.
So after 8 years of consulting, and then I got recruited to work at Steelcase to design furniture. So that was, you know, another like going back in house, but also scaling up the size of things I was designing and working more spatially, in furniture and in particular in healthcare settings. So that was also another interesting variable.
Yeah, it's a wild field. I'm working on a healthcare project now, coming off of a an office focused project, and like
Mhm.
the difference in research and complexity is so massive going into the healthcare space. There's just so much certification and requirements, and even like spaces just within like a standard hospital facility. There's such a vast number of different types of spaces, and they all have like very specific kind of like consumer empathetic requirements to them, like a behavioral health facility
Yeah,
staff room versus like a surgical care staff
yeah.
room. Even just those staff rooms are completely different. So it's such like a wild category.
It really is. Yeah, the good thing for me about working in that space in health is it's always inherently has meaning to it, right? Like as designers, we're always like, that was very satisfying to know that, you know, whatever I was working on had a bigger opportunity to make a bigger impact, a positive impact on people's lives that really needed, and they needed design, right? In those spaces. And so I think for that reason, it made it totally worth it. Especially getting to design furniture for people in those spaces and in those experiences. Because, something that throughout my career as I progressed that I've really um, that I've done kind of naturally is distanced myself from, and I might be shooting myself in the foot here. Distance myself from is like just superfluous, like high design
Yeah,
artifacts that it's just like for the ego,
sure, sure.
and not really moving the world in a better direction. I say that now and then, like I might design whatever next and then people will call me out on it. But like whatever, we have to pay the bills and we have to design. We have to design more junk, right? Hopefully not, but it's a tough balancing act, right? Um,
It
but in
is.
any case,
I do
working
feel
in
like,
health. Go
yeah, I
ahead.
do feel like there's value in having balance to those two sides as well. Like I feel like there's always designers kind of living in either camp, like people who are like kind of really engineering brains, super function focused, and then kind of that flip side of like superfluous emotion driven design. And I
Yep.
feel like both always have their value. It's just all about like, and we, I think you and I, we were kind of talking about this throughout the week, but it's like how it connects to you as a person, and is it like truly authentic to how you feel and where your interests are,
Yeah.
as opposed to like just doing something to do it because you think other people will like it, or because you think it fits this mold that's required to hit a certain price point or whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a great way to say it. It has to have, at the end of the day, it should have meaning, whether it's meaning for the world or for yourself, um, and I think that's part of the reason why I shied away from the fashion side of things. Even though what we design, like it's it's totally part of fashion as well. It's aesthetics, right? But us as industrial designers, we always like to think, oh, well, we like to design things to be timeless. We don't follow fashion trends, right? But it's impossible to avoid that. There's always trends impacting what hard goods, hardware. Um, but
Yeah.
get back to, oh, sorry, go ahead. You had
Oh,
something.
no, sorry. I just wanted to ask you a quick question because this is just like a parallel that is standing out to me as you're kind of going through your career. I think both consultancies and as well as the healthcare industry, for design are both like kind of heavily associated with burnout. I know like architects and interior designers and people who live kind of more in other areas of design. There's usually a high turnover rate when it comes to people who are focused on healthcare. And then you mentioned kind of the consultancy burning the midnight oil. How have you kind of kept that in balance? Because you're talking about like you start adding up those years, right? Like 4 years at Continuum, 4 years at Smart Design. How many years were you at Steelcase?
Just under 3 years.
Under three. So that's a pretty good chunk of your career to kind of maintain a momentum. And we're not even kind of getting into like the side projects and personal projects that you're putting out during that time.
Yeah.
Like, do you have any kind of advice on keeping all of those things in check?
Oh boy. To like balance it all.
Yeah, yeah. Or just to not get burnt out and kind of stay creative and stay interested and stay passionate in like what you're doing.
Yeah, I think diversifying, you know, your experiences and your day to day. I mean, I tried to do that as much as I could, sometimes more successful than others. I'm trying to think. It's funny thinking back now. It wasn't until I started at Steelcase and went back in house that I had way more time after work. Okay, so I think I really, during my time at Continuum and Smart Design, I really gave all of, everything I had in me to those two companies, those two firms. Um, and it took kind of like stepping out of that and going working in house at a company like Steelcase, which is similar work-life balance as Clark's, 9 to 5, and um, where I found myself like realizing, oh my gosh, everyone, like this is amazing. Everyone just leaves at 5 or 5:30, and suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all of this extra creative energy to put towards Touchy Feely, my book, and then Co-Check Chair. Those are my two big side projects, you know. And it was because of that almost 3 years when I was in Michigan that I was like, okay, this is it. This is when I'm gonna like actually bring these to the finish line, you know. And so I think that's what it took, like realistically, like looking back at it, right? Because I think I was there was glimmers of it when I was at Smart Design, but it was like I was just too spent to go anywhere with it, you know. It just wasn't possible. I would just like I would have to catch up on sleep on the weekends, you know. So it
Yeah,
was very
yeah.
much that, and it was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, I love my time at Smart Design and Continuum, but it was very much a work hard, play hard kind of mentality, right? And it was also a bit younger too, right? It was like
Right.
it was more youthful, and whereas working at a place like, well, Clark's, even though I was fresh out of school, and Steelcase, it just I worked with like generally older people, right? There was still like the design team had young people, but it was just a different culture. And similarly to HP as well, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think too, like having that set schedule and getting in like a routine can be just so important, especially for industrial design, where sometimes these projects that we work on, they're not always quick. Sometimes they can be attached to a longer timeline. I would imagine, especially if you're working on a book or something where it's like a bit more ambitious, it's composed of many smaller pieces, like being able to get into that routine and that rhythm and kind of slowly chip away at it over time,
Mhm.
um, is I would imagine pretty useful. Whereas if you're just kind of going really hard all the time and you're barely carving out hours here and there, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to like maintain that momentum, and see those things through to the end.
Exactly. Exactly. So it was no, and it's so important, you know, like to that's why to make time for yourself, to make time for those side projects, for those, I mean, yeah, we call them side projects, but they can turn into startups, you know, they can turn into something much greater, right? And I think seeing it that way and having that kind of um a mindset or kind of perspective on it is, I think, is really important, as opposed to just seeing them as side projects or as hobbies, right? And I guess hobbies are one thing, like that's where you like to dabble, like, you know, I
Right.
play music and guitar and like to write music, but like I'm not on like I'm not trying to build up to becoming like a rock star, you know.
Yeah, there's no stakes
Yeah, I'm
in
not
comparison.
exactly just doing it just for the love of it, which, you know, that should always be the case anyway in whatever we do. But you know what I'm saying? Like the side projects are like our hope is that they turn into more than just side projects, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and usually, I mean, there's gonna be something. I feel like for me, a project usually is defined by some moment where you're really putting yourself out there and you're taking some element of a risk in terms of what you're sharing and this idea that you're kind of sharing it with, um not necessarily like the world, but just like your professional network, like your coworkers or potential employers are going to be seeing this thing that you're working on.
yeah,
And I feel like that kind of gets attached with a certain amount of like levity to it.
totally. And it's our opportunity to like build our own brands, right? Because when we work for these other companies, we're, you know, the help, we're hired guns. um and it's a wonderful, you know, career, and great to have these awesome jobs and work for these great companies, but at the end of the day we don't own the companies, we're, you know, and we don't own the designs that we produce for them. um
Yeah, for sure. That might be a good segue. So, is that kind of some of the mentality that maybe led into you starting your own consultancy and kind of working for yourself?
it is, that's definitely part of it. Is, you know, I wanted to give myself the opportunity, the time, and the space to build my own brand and work towards, you know, being my own signature designer, right? Whatever that means, or author, right? Have authorship over the things I design, even if it's being hired by other companies, like I'm the consultant. I'm still like I'm the design partner, right? So even that is a different thing, right? So where I become the smart design or whoever, I'm not just an extension of the team, so
Yeah.
I'm the name, that they work with.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear maybe like a little bit more about that transition because I think there are um a lot of people who probably dream about kind of starting their own company. And for me, it's always been um like a mind-blowing idea. Like I just can't fathom starting my own business. It just seems like such a large task and a very difficult transition to make. So like I'm just curious, like how did you kind of begin that process? Did you start building kind of like a second income stream that allowed you to transition, or was it a little bit more of a kind of a jumping into the deep end with both feet?
I think it was really jumping into the deep end. But I should say, I'm very lucky because and privileged because I have an amazing partner, Martel Esposito, who has a full-time job, and she supports me, both financially and emotionally, um, on my journey, as an entrepreneur. And so I don't, it would just be so much harder without her help. She really, and she also jumps in and helps me with my studio stuff on top of having her full-time job. I mean, it's incredible. So that's like, if you have a supportive partner, that's a huge plus. Um, and like the other thing to say here too is that I'm not doing a startup, right? It's not like I'm trying to I have all these upfront investments going towards trying to develop my own product line per se. That is happening in a different form, but I'm first and foremost a consultant, so it's less risky, right? So I take on, like, I'm hired by companies, by startups, by whatever, to do projects for them, as opposed to me being the company, right, and starting, because that's a much bigger risk and takes a lot more upfront capital. Um, so I can't speak to that, and I don't think I could have taken that kind of a financial risk. I just don't have that kind of money. Um, and the other thing too is, you know, I live in Baltimore, and so your place, you have to consider, right, your finances, the cost of living and all that stuff, and making sacrifices, right, in order to take these risks. So to me, Baltimore is like an incubator, a great incubator city, for something that I'm doing. I should say I have zero clients. Zero of my clients are in Baltimore, right? So it's really, Baltimore is a great, like, cheap, affordable place for me to have a studio and do my thing and have the space that I couldn't get in New York or, top tier cities. That that's those are the cities that are where my clients are, right? And I travel there quite often. New York, Boston, and
Yeah, I would think Baltimore is like a good location as well because you are kind of still in that cluster of cities where you have like Baltimore, Philadelphia, DC, New York. Like
yeah,
those are all kind of within like a 3 hour drive. So you're still able to like connect with those businesses, at least on like a physical level if you need to, you know.
exactly. Yeah, it's like 2.5 hours on the train to New York from here. And it's I could do a day trip if I really needed to as well. It's not the end of the world, right? And so that's the beauty of being here. And what brought me here originally was actually Martel. She's on top of working her full-time job at a company in DC and being supportive to my studio. She's also chipping away at getting her doctorate at the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins.
Oh
So
wow.
so that's what really brought us here was Johns Hopkins. And I was just I knew very little about Baltimore, and I was like, wow, this could be a perfect spot to try something new, and experiment. And it really is. I think, yeah. So considering, your place, right, like geographically, um, where you start as taking these kind of risks is important as well. I mean, I know plenty of young designers who go to New York and are freelancers in New York, and that's cool, but like, man, I couldn't afford that. I think there's a certain level of a socioeconomic level that one has to have in order to pull that off. Or you have like 10 roommates or something, and you work out of a cafe.
Yeah, that was definitely my situation when I moved to Boston. I was living in a house with 5 people. Um, it was definitely it was definitely a little wild, but at the
That's
same
fun
time,
too.
when your
It's
rent
all,
is like $600 a month, and you can just start putting that money away for like what that
yeah,
long-term play is, you know?
exactly. No, and it's a lot of fun. Those are great memories that you make. And I had that time, I had my time in Boston, New York, and more recently Barcelona, which was a great experience with HP. And I think, and so getting back to like kind of the reasons why I went off on my own. So certainly what we already talked about was a big one, which was wanting ownership, and really giving myself that opportunity um, to have that, right? And that takes sacrifice. It's almost like three steps backwards to have a shot at a larger step forward. And another reason as well was, well, of course, at the time of that decision, I was in Barcelona and Martel was already in Baltimore, so we were long distance. Um, for that 2.5, 3 years, I was over there, and so that played into it as well. We needed to be back together, and I had one year pre-pandemic when I was there, and then the pandemic hit, and then everything kind of went out the window, and I was
Yeah.
working on the furniture, that Prince project, which was awesome. But then I think like everyone during that time, we all reevaluated our lives and our careers. And so that absolutely played a part in it. And then I think the last reason too was my own personal kind of identity, which maybe is a good segue into my talk. But um, I there was always a part of me that was kind of stifled or um, suppressed or repressed. And I think in order, I almost needed to kind of unravel it all, like peel back all the layers in order to find myself again, you know, my true identity before I kind of was throwing all of these, um, other identities on myself as a way to kind of hide from it. And um and so that, you know I think deep down I knew that I almost needed to kind of dismantle my ego, right? And realize, oh man, so much of what's propping up what was my current my former identity was all built around the ego, right? So I was Joey as whatever does, like, design director, designing for XYZ company, and living in cool cities and whatever, you know what I mean, like all of that stuff. And by quitting my job at HP, moving from, like making the conscious decision to move from Barcelona to Baltimore, you know, like um anytime I tell people that, they're like, what did who does that? Like,
Yeah, those are very different cities, but like yeah, it's definitely getting that check too, I think, around like happiness and understanding like what not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Like understanding that deeper reason that's driving you is, I feel like, the most critical step in a career. And I think for a lot of people that usually happens either after some period of success or learning. You kind of go through that phase of being younger and pushing really, really hard. And
Mm.
at some point there's a pause or a break, or there's some forced event where it causes you to kind of like look around a little bit and really kind of look inward and figure out, okay, well, why am I doing this? Where is this all going? And what am I really like building up to? Um, yeah, I'm curious to ask, the talk you gave at IDC, we wanted to attend, but tickets were $5,000 a piece, so we ended up not going to IDC this
I
year. But
well, I've
I did.
never. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I did see the talk like really getting a lot of attention on Instagram. It was getting tagged in a lot of stories, and it seemed like it really resonated with a lot of people. But maybe for like those who couldn't attend, what was kind of the 30, like what is kind of the pitch around the main message you were driving?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just empathize with you that this was the first IDC I'd ever been to, only
Oh
because
wow.
I was speaking and I didn't have to pay such a huge
Right.
price tag, right? But I never went my whole career because I just couldn't justify. Like,
Right, right.
I wish that would have been great, networking. God, like just my working class mentality. Um, so yeah, so well, starting from June 1st, I came out as trans gender, right? And it's been a whirlwind ever since, um and that was kind of my big like me coming to terms with myself, like self-acceptance, right? And and I think that process alone was like huge. That had to happen first before any of this, and when that did, things kind of just clicked into place. And it's still, it's not like everything's perfect, and it's a it's its own process, its own journey. But like I feel like I'm finally on the right side of my own history, and I was happy I was able to do this before I turned 40, because I turned 40 in May. So that was a big accomplishment. And so hopefully now I can have like a healthier midlife crisis.
Right.
But so anyways, I did that, and then at around sh shortly after I applied to be a speaker at IDC, and it was all part of my like kind of package deal to myself. I said, okay, if I'm gonna really do this, come out, I'm gonna, like submit my talk idea um, to speak at this conference, and it was selected. And essentially, yeah, it's the talk. Well, it's about a few things, right? It's called Beyond the Black Turtleneck, and I mean, the black turtleneck really is like symbolic of the old guard, kind of like it's hard to explain, almost like the Steve Jobs era, you know.
Like that kind of Forbes cover startup, like
Yeah,
2000 or like kind of 2000s. I think that was really getting a lot of momentum.
yeah, and it's kind of, well, it has a lot. Actually, the Barbie movie came out right around the time when I was giving the talk, and it's really about patriarchy, right? To be
Yeah, I
perfect.
didn't have a chance to see it, but I heard that it had like kind of some of those like deeper themes and deeper
Yeah,
messages to it.
exactly. So it was similar in that way, where I guess the black turtleneck was symbolic to me of patriarchy, even though
Mhm.
the black turtleneck itself did nothing wrong, right?
Right.
Piece of clothing. Uh, so, and I still wear black turtlenecks, like not often, but like, whatever. I was just using it's like a provocation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So my talk was three parts. So the first part, I talked about kind of the history of the industrial design field and a little bit of design in general. kind of where it started, how it's evolved. And then I transitioned into my own identity within that, within the world of industrial design, and in my own history, right? Who I was and who I've kind of strived to become as an industrial designer within this kind of old guard, right? Of how I of who I saw uh, was at the top of it, right? And who I aspired to be. Um, and even though it wasn't really me at the end of the day, like it was kind of the wrong aspirations to have, um, because I was almost, I needed, someone else to look up to, maybe, who is more like me. And so that was part two. And during that part, it got pretty emotional. I think this was maybe I people like I couldn't see anything in the audience, and people were telling me people were crying and stuff, and because I kind of got a little choked up because that like I talked about some of the things about you know it was like personal narratives and cultural narratives, right?
Yeah.
That create us in our worldview. And I talked about some of the cultural narratives and some of the movies and pop culture in my like formative years in the 90s, early 2000s. And one of those was from what was it called? Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Um, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I loved that movie as a kid. It was great, hilarious and goofy Jim Carrey. But the scene with the trans person, right? And kind of everyone, it was so like slapstick comedy and over the top, but like everyone vomiting or Jim Carrey like being so disgusted, um, in response to having kissed this person, right? And so I think that was the point when it was hard for me to actually like articulate that because I had done it so many times in my like when I was rehearsing for this talk, but actually saying it out loud on stage to like 400 to 500 people was like it was hard to say,
Yeah.
and so it felt very vulnerable. I think that's why I was getting like choked up a little bit, and I think everyone kind of felt that, and I think that was the yeah, it was just I think it worked to my advantage, let's say, because
Yeah.
people were really engaged, right? And I yeah, I tried really hard also to make this talk not like I don't know, like something that like your run of the mill, like diversity is important and we need to do
Yes.
Y and Z, you know what I mean? And
I know
it's
exactly what you mean.
not
Yeah.
that there's anything wrong with those kinds of presentations. I want to make that clear, but I wanted this to really cut through that noise in a way that anyone could really relate to, or at least want to listen to, right? And I knew the only way I could do that was by being extremely vulnerable, and that's what I tried to do. And so I think yeah, seemed to work to my advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
um
course, this is probably the part where I'm actually seeing all of the posts. This is where everyone's taking pictures and
yeah.
uploading to
Yeah,
Instagram stories
exactly.
as you're in your like most vulnerable state.
Yeah, exactly. But it was
But
all real,
yeah,
like, well, and just to finish before I forget, chapter three then was, and this was a very important part, like how does this relate to design, right? Because this had to be, that had to exist in order to make this applicable for to be so selected for an industrial design conference. And it was really good. So I basically drew parallels between my experience as a trans person and us as designers, and how we design the things we design that are transformational, right? And
mm,
so I went through examples of that, and one of which was the Furniture That Prints project, right? So to me, that's like a classic industrial design project. You can't redesign anything more mundane, right? And give it a new story to tell. But the reason why I included that one was because it's a mashup, right, of two different ways of being, two different identities. You have a printer and you have furniture, right? And when you mash these things together and don't necessarily they don't necessarily blend together to become one thing. You point at it and say, oh, that's, well, I don't know, is that a printer or is that furniture? I'm not sure, right? And in a sense, it almost captures the non-binary expression in a way. Uh, and so, you know, because I think the mashups where you can still recognize both parts still, where you can say, oh, I see, you know, maybe the ratio is like 60% printer, 40% furniture. And that was kind of the idea of chapter 3. And I went through some other case studies of not, that wasn't just my work, right? That I've seen that have been kind of really interesting examples of those mashups, as well as challenging social norms, you know, yeah, challenging different social norms, which is an area of focus that I'm really excited about pursuing, you know, moving forward in my for my studio.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like as designers, we're inherently drawn to risk on some level. And I feel like we're in kind of this strange period right now within design as a whole, where a lot of things have become very polished and very kind of tuned down. Like you kind of see it with things like McDonald's, where they've lost the golden arches over the years. It's become very modern and slick. It seems like right now the hot topic is Johnson and Johnson's logo design. They kind of removed this expressive script that was really tied to their heritage and have moved to kind of like a very sans serif brand and or sans serif typeface. And I feel like we definitely need more risk taking. I feel like we need design to kind of stick our neck out maybe a little bit more and almost have this acceptance that not everything will be perfect. Not everything will be completely fine tuned and relatable to every single person on the market. We can have both. We can have kind of like mainstream volume drivers, but we can have more niche ideas um, that can relate to certain audiences. And I think Gen Z will be a big driver of that. You can already see just the way they're coming in. Their generation is so much more accepting and like individually expressive. I think if the old guard can really like foster that generation and help them like hold their values as they progress in their careers,
Yeah.
we could potentially have like a much brighter field of products and design and a kind of a more bold world to live in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, um, yeah, we're soon enough we're gonna be the old guard, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's no, it's really good. But um, what was I gonna say? Yeah, so I guess um, so the presentation went really well. You know, it was really well received, and it was good, you know, exposure for me. So it was well worth all of that time invested in crafting that presentation, which I always joke now, like it ruined my summer, you know, because
Yeah.
you know, it was like, I mean, essentially June, July, and then yeah, leading up to the end of August, I was just so, you know, just anxiously waiting for for to give that presentation.
Yeah, I mean hearing you tell kind of the story and like the timelines especially like that is I mean huge props to you for taking that risk and like taking that step out because that is a very quick
Yeah,
progression of thought and in your career and like in the way that you're putting yourself out there. Um yeah, super bold. I mean it's awesome.
thanks for saying that. Yeah, no, and I think now, you know, the great thing about it is like it's amazing um just being yourself, what that can do, right? So
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, like they always tell us when we were kids growing up, always be yourself, right? Well, you know, it's like the cliche. It's like, what does that even mean? How do you always be yourself? And you know, but it's like, wow, it's sometimes it takes a lot of work to just be yourself.
Yeah.
And when you are truly yourself, kind of the blessings that come with it, right? And you know, the opportunities, the just things seem to fall into place more, right? It's like we're not resisting what is. It's a bit philosophical and existential, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. And I think one of the best outcomes of this whole thing of self-acceptance and you know, hopefully not just acceptance, but like celebration, right? And love,
Right.
um, is is that I found more purpose in my life, you know, like I have, you know, anytime people ask me, well, why do you design? I'd be like, you know, I always struggled with that, you know, like, I don't know, like I could say I want to make the world more sustainable or create more sustainable products, or I could say social causes, or you know, I want to make products more ergonomic, you know, like what are all the or maybe I guess you could, you know, make things more inclusive. um, but it wasn't until this happened that I was like, oh yeah, this is who I am, and this is my opportunity to kind of turn my pain and shame into something, you know, really, like I can really use my design talent to help, you know, an underserved population that I'm a part of. And that's kind of the next phase for me, you know, is
Yeah.
figuring out how I fit into that and what I can do that's that's can be helpful, right? Whether that results in, you know, a manufactured product or not, I don't know, that's still TBD. But there's plenty of
Yeah.
things.
I feel like there's something to be said for when you put a lot of energy um into something, whether it's like a talk or a design, like whatever it is you're trying to execute or say. I think people can feel that energy that's put in. And
Yeah,
when it's very honest and very truthful and very focused, I think it typically will resonate very well. But if it's something that isn't necessarily as honest, or you're doing it for a different reason, it just won't click with audiences for whatever reason.
yeah, yeah, that's right. I totally agree with that. Um,
It's
yeah, and you know, I one last thing about the presentation that I'm very proud of, is that I threw my notes away before I walked out on the stage, so I had no like zero.
You're gonna give me a panic attack.
Oh my God. I like even just thinking about it now, I'm like, my palms are sweating, you know? Like I don't
Yeah.
even know how the hell I did that. Like, well, I internalized the shit out of my stuff, but even still, it's like even still to like to get to that point where I was like just, you know, just gonna walk out on stage, whew, and face the audience, like it was hard. And that's kind of what it took, though, I think, to put me in that like the vulnerable position, because I didn't have a crutch. So I was forced to engage the audience, you know, because if I had walked out there with notes, I probably would have, you know, like shied away a little bit and wouldn't have been as open, let's say. So
Yeah. Yeah. And when you know it, you know, especially if it's coming from that honest place, and it's connected to who you are, and what is, you don't necessarily need notes to be able to tell someone who you are or tell someone about yourself. So as long as you really like kind of have that belief and that confidence, then
exactly.
yeah, you can
And to,
just throw them to the side.
and to be clear, like I'm not a professional TED talk giver, right? So
Yeah.
uh, for the viewers, for those listening, don't expect you know, super polished presentation. It's whatever, a designer giving a presentation, if that makes any sense to you. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm really excited for your next chapter. I'm really excited to see where you go and how you're able to kind of fit these puzzle pieces together and really like manifest them and kind of manifest this like next destiny and this, you know, this next chapter in your life. It's going to be an awesome ride for sure. I'm just really happy and really excited for you.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks a lot. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, thanks for, asking really, really great questions and guiding the conversation. It's always a pleasure,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome, Joey. Thank you for your time. I know we kind of had a short one today, but anytime you have a project or anytime you have anything we want to talk about, even if it's just the state of design, you're more than welcome to come on for a chat. So really appreciate it and super grateful for your time.
Yeah, you got it. Likewise, Ray.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.